Welcome to this presentation on Oracle Database Privilege Analysis. Thanks to the Latvian Oracle user group for giving me the chance to give this presentation at this OGB EMEA virtual tour. Let's see how we can achieve the least privilege principle with the Oracle database. Some words about me. My name is Markus Flechtner. I'm from Germany. I work for Trivardis Germany. We're one of the larger consulting companies in the German-speaking area, and pretty sure you know some of my colleagues. I studied mathematics so 30 years ago, and during the time at the university, I came in contact with Oracle, and that's determined my professional career. I joined Trivardis in 2008, and now I focus on high availability and upgrade and migration. We have trainings, so I'm teacher for RAG training, new features training, multi-tenant and Postgres. And in fact, this presentation is an extended section of our new features training. I'm on Twitter, MarkusDBA, and I'm blogging on markusdba.net, which is my English blog. I'm an Oracle ace, and in 2016 or so, we wrote a book in German on Oracle Database 12c, which was really fun. It's in German, will probably not really interest you, but just to mention it. Some words about Trivardis. Okay, I think it's well known in the Oracle community. We were founded in 1984, so 27 years on the market. Started in Switzerland and get workspaces in Germany, Austria, and Denmark, and later on Romania. About 700 employees, 800 customers, just some numbers. Basically, this is a slide we showed in our presentations until June. And in the beginning of July, things changed a little bit. As you are now part of Accenture, so everything is ongoing, that we join the different groups in Accenture and we'll see what happens. But people keep the same and the knowledge keeps the same. Okay. Least privilege principle. Here's our SOAK tips from Sora. Swiss Oracle user community, one of the user communities which was involved in these Groundbreakers tour. Make sure to enforce the principle of least privilege in your database. And that's what we are talking about, the importance of security in your database. So what's on the agenda today? Of course, we start with a short introduction. Then we'll take a look at the tools which are delivered by Oracle for these privilege analysis. There's a package and some additional data dictionary objects. We'll take a look on the workflow, how to gather the required privileges, and later on we check how to evaluate results and to adopt the privileges according to the analysis. Just grant the privileges which are really needed by the users. And of course, as always, at the end, a summary and some links to further information on this topic. Let's start with the introduction. Okay, looking back, security wasn't really important. Sometimes they say it compiles, so ship it. Main focus was to get the thing running, functionality, it should work. There are even applications where the installation scripts start with grant DBA to some application user, and no one really thought about it. or they said, oh, we'll start in the development area with DBA privileges, and later on we'll check which privileges are really needed. And you know, later means never in this context. And when you see, we often say, grant DBA to public, and this statement, which is presented in the code box, grant DBA to public with admin option, really works in the Oracle database. So, but that's of course not the thing we want to achieve. This principle of the least privilege is really old, almost 40 years. And the original quote is, every program and every privileged user of the system should operate using the least amount of privilege necessary to complete the job. So only the privileges you really need. So you can see only the data you really need, etc. And over the last years, security became one of the focus topics, and this least privilege principle became more and more important. And there is a tool within Oracle for that. It has been available for a long time, was introduced with Oracle Database 12c, so in the year 2013. It's called privilege analysis, which really does a job. Captures the privileges which are used, how they have been granted to the users, report the privileges which have been granted but not used, so you can revoke them. But there was this small price tag, database vault option required. And when I look around in my customers, no one of them, at least except one, has this database vault option. So this feature has been interesting, has not been interesting for a lot of customers for a long time. But almost 3 years ago, Oracle changed licensing. Pete Finnegan, one of the security experts, tweeted on that. And when you check the license information, you simply need the Enterprise Edition. And this license change was backported back to 12c release 1. And you need Enterprise Edition. You can even run it on the Express Edition. If you have a small amount of data, think about running Standard Edition 2 in production. If you can extract a small amount of data for your tests, you can even do it with the Express Edition. And this change was the reason for me to prepare this presentation, which I've given several times and various conferences, to bring this feature back to the attention of the users, of the DBAs, that there is an easy tool to make a step forward to the least privilege principle. So it's not really a new feature. It has been available since 2013, but since 2018, it's available for all Enterprise Edition users. No price tag anymore. Okay. Okay. That theory, in reality, logging database users is kind of auditing. And at least in Germany, auditing is considered critical in many areas. And usually the companies have to ask the Workers' Council if it's okay. In most areas, it's okay. Think about finance. But think about that if there are any similar regulations in your country. don't enable privilege analysis just because it's a cool feature. Ask for the allowance to do that. When running this script, this tool at customers, or the developers were not really happy, or even third-party software vendors were not happy, because at least you will find out with this analysis that they did not do a good job when developing the software. And no developer likes that. But it's security-related feature, so security is a good argument. And as a DBA, yeah, so your document can document the privileges which are needed, and even if the privileges are not changed, it's documented. You tell your manager he's in charge, and you're out if there are any security issues. You told everyone there's a problem, or there can be a problem, and the others, your manager, etc., they have to decide. Okay, what's in the database for this privilege analysis? It's basically a package, DBMS privilege capture, and some dictionary objects, dictionary views for reporting the privilege usage. Let's start with DBMS privilege capture, this package. You see a number of procedures in the list here in this table, and in short, this sequence, this order, a little bit shows the workflow. The first thing is that you have to create a capture policy. What do you want to capture? Then you enable the capture, let your application run, do all the tests. At the end, you disable the capture, then everything is somewhere in memory. And with generate result, you fill various dictionary views with the results, and then you can check the results, create your own scripts on that. Drop capture and delete run are kind of housekeeping tools, and capture dependency privs is a special procedure when you think about PL SQL programs with definers right and invokers right. These procedures need some special attention. Okay, dictionary views. You have the DBA priv captures, which policies are defined, which runs have been executed so far. Priv capture dollar is the internal view. So DBA priv captures depends on that. Capture priv dollar and capture run log dollar, information on the privileges and the capture runs. One important thing, capture run log dollar mentions the start time and the end time of a run. So the period of time when you checked the privileges and this information did not make it to the DBA views. So can be a good option to check the capture run log dollar view. And of course, there are CDB views available for container database. That's about definition and logging for this privilege capture. And there are lots of result views. Basically, there are two groups of views, one for the used privileges, and one for the unused privileges. Privileges which have been granted, but which have not been used, or were not used during the capture period. We have DBA used privs, DBA unused privs. This is an overview with all privileges. DBA pub privs, DBA used pub privs is use privileges granted to public, which are always considered a risk. We have DBA used sys privs, which is system privileges, create session, create table, etc. And as an important thing, we have DBA used this privs path. And we have similar path views for the other privilege types. And what does path mean in this context? Think about a role granted to another role granted to a user. And if you want to find out how a user has been granted a privilege, you have to follow this path to the role and then to the next role. This is meant with path in this context. And we have for object privs, the same thing, DBA use object privs, object priv path, and user privs path. So next thing is, let's take a look at the workflow. First thing is that you have to decide what to capture. You have to somehow identify the application in your database. Is it a specific user, a specific role, or some kind of session context? And these capture policies need this information for the definition so that Oracle knows what to capture. If you don't know, if you cannot identify a user in with these tools, or when you identify the application with these tools, you can capture all database activities, but keep in mind that can be a long list of privileges. So we have 4 options for capturing. One is database. So all activities. Role means activities for a role. So you can check if your application has got DBA privileges, you can check which DBA privileges are really needed. Context, so you have user context, we'll see that later. And you can combine role and context. Okay. This is a procedure, DBMS privilege capture, create capture. Provide a name for the policy, description. Type is the list of, one of the lists we had on the slide before. Roles, okay, list of roles, and the condition is that then is the context. Let's see some examples. Easy thing is create, capture all activities, use a type, DBMS privilege capture G database. If you want to privilege, or if you want to capture all privileges granted to public, so if you want to get rid of a lot of public grants, use DBMS privilege capture role and use the role public. If you want to capture all the privileges used by a specific user, you have to use a session context. You can use this context, user and environment session user, in this case, user Scott. And the last example on the lower part of the slide, you can of course combine roles and user. So in this example, we'll check which DBA privileges are really needed by the user Scott. So that's the definition. Here are some examples for the context. Basically, everything which can be used in this context can be chosen for the capture policies. Some things which are frequently used are session user, host, operating system user. And if you are using DBMS application info for your application, you can use module and action. And if none of these options fits, you can define your own context via DBMS session. Set context, and then you can query this context for the policy. When you start the capture, just using DBMS privilege capture, enable capture, you provide the name, and you can provide a run name. You have different runs or multiple runs for the same policy. It's a good way to provide a run name that you can distinguish the runs. Example in the lower part, one test run started in November 2019. No? Okay, now the capture is enabled, and you can tell your users, come on, go ahead and test the application. And that's really the critical part, running the application, because you have to run everything which will be ever done in your application. If you have an automated set of, if you've got a set of automated tests, you're fine. But if not, you have to click through every screen. And I once did this for a customer, such a privilege analysis, and the database was used for some financial things, and we started in December and with the capture and ended in middle of January to get all the year-end activities captured. So think about these special things which happen once a year, that you capture these actions. Otherwise, you can run into problems in the next year if you have removed some privileges which are required for these one-time or once-a-year actions. And then your manager will call you, hey, there's an issue. I've got to get a message, insufficient privileges, what happened? No. Okay, then you at the end stop the capture, DBMS privilege capture, disable capture, just provide the policy, and it will end the current run. When you stop the capture, all the results are in memory only, and they have to be transferred to the data dictionary. And this is done using the procedure generate result. This procedure fills these DBA used and unused views you've seen before. Just provide the name and the run name, dependency equal to true if you have these PL/SQL objects in your database and you want to capture the dependent privileges too. Okay, so simple example, name and run name. If you don't specify the run name, we'll get the same results in the DBA used and unused views, but you will not be able to find out which one was the source of this row. So it's a good idea to keep this run name. So, some things around that. Okay, there's this new role, capture admin, which is required to run procedures. You can only have one capture running at a time. In case you bounce the database, or the instance during a test, or when a capture policy is active, you lose all your captured privileges because they're only in memory. But when the instance comes up again, the capture policy remains active. Results are kept at least in the this stable space where all the data is stored until you delete the run or drop the policy. It's a good idea, and I'll come to some details later, that you create your own tables using create table select from these DBA used views that you can later on work with it. In container databases, there's no global possibility to enable a capture. You have to enable it on container level, which basically means PDB. Yeah? One question which was very often asked in my previous presentation on that, what about this topic? What about performance? And it's my experience and a number of customer tests, no real impact on the performance. This may be different in your application, but in my cases, I had applications with several hundred users. We had no performance issues during the privilege capture. So as everything is stored in this aux table space, in some projects I chose the following workflow that we do daily runs of this capture, and using a database job somewhere around midnight, for example, you disable a capture, generate results, and then you move the data out of the system table space, a sysaux table space, in your own tables. So insert into some tables, select star from these DBI used views. Then you delete the run and enable the capture again. So you can keep your sysaux table space small. Of course, there's a short period of time where you don't capture information, but in my experience, this can be neglected. And as mentioned before, when an instance fails, you lose on your data, and this procedure, this workflow will help you not to lose all the data, just the data of the last day. Okay. One thing with PL/SQL objects or views, grants via role are not sufficient, as we all know. And so direct grants are required. And you can see that when you check DBA use privileges, we have the views role, which is a right column here. And we have two different privileges on the same table, in this case, HR employees. And in one case, the role PA user, which is a username, was used. So it's a direct grant for a view for PL/SQL objects. And if you do a simple select, the PA user role is okay. That's the second line here. So keep that in mind that you have to keep the direct grants for views and PL/SQL objects. Okay, so now we have got the data, and now we have to evaluate the results and create our own roles and grant statements to achieve the least privilege principle. And unfortunately, there's no real support from Oracle for this second part. Oracle provides all these dictionary views, DBA used and unused, but you have to do all the further work yourself. But let's go through this views first. If the DBA used dispriv path, for example, you've got the select any table privilege, and you see the grant path Scott. So and that's one thing, and the second thing is the second row. Let's check the grant path. You have the grant to Scott, but the privilege is granted via the role secret and top secret. So at the end, it was granted to the role top secret was granted to secret, and secret was granted to Scott. On the other hand, simple example, the create session privilege was granted via the connect role. In fact, the create session is the only privilege which is nowadays part of the connect role. So this on the sysprefs. Okay, 2 ways. Yeah. Okay. DBA used object prefs, so all the objects. When you log on to a database, you always need DBMS application info and dual. So we have these public grants, and then the user did some selects on the departments table and employees table and an update on the HR table. This is kind of auditing I mentioned in the beginning. When you know the time frame when this run took place, you get about now when did the user do what. So we have this DBA use prefs, which includes all the privileges, system privileges and object privileges. So here's a full list. We can see all the privileges we had before: DBMS application info, dual table, and employees table and departments. So it's the overview. DBA unused prefs, another really interesting view, because you can see a lot of privileges which are granted to a user by default sometimes, but not used. This v underscore dollar SQL plan statistics all are for real-time performance monitoring of your own sessions, access to data pump directory because the user can do data pump, DBMS flashback, user can do flashback, and lots of privileges which are there, but which are not always needed. For example, this select any dictionary privilege is not really required for a typical application user. So this is DBA use prefs with all the columns you can see. So we can even see where it comes from. So the OS user, user host. The sequence which is mentioned here looks like the sequence of actions when the privilege was needed. I observed that this is not always the case. It's roughly the sequence, but not in every case. And then we have the used role, system privilege, object privilege, and user privilege, and the object which has been used. Okay, you can even do it with cloud control. There's an area on that, and in cloud control, you can create a capture, start capture, stop capture, generates results, and view the reports. But once again, not the second step, creating specific roles depending on the results. So here are the results of my analysis, almost the same results as we have seen them before. This is graphical representation, but in terms of information, it's the same. Okay, so next step is to grant to create the grant commands. Simple thing is for the system privileges, just say grant sys privilege to, in this case, a role from DB use privs. We omit the any privileges because, as always, we don't like any privileges in the security area. And this will give you finally a list of system privileges like create session or create table. Second part, the object privileges. It looks complicated. And the only thing which makes it complicated is that we reduce the select any table privileges or only any privileges to specific object privileges. This is a case section on lines 2 to 10 that we reduce with anything. It's not my query, it's based on a blog post by Norman Sibbing from Oracle Germany. I didn't want to invent the wheel, reinvent the wheel. And when you put both together, if you maybe follow the example we had before, we come to create session privileges for user Scott, and this execute an application info, select on the HR views, select on dual, and update on the employees test table. So from the whole list of privileges, these are the remaining 8 privileges which are required for the user Scott in my test, in this test. And then you can go and revoke all the privileges which have been granted to Scott before, create the role, and then grant the role to Scott. And then you're fine. And Scott only has got the privileges which he really needs. Okay. And that's it basically. To sum up, privilege analysis is a really great tool for checking your database, which privileges are really required. As mentioned, the second step is not included, but it's just simple SQL. Include such analysis in your tests is a recommendation from my side. Hopefully, you've got automated tests for that. And as mentioned, the license restrictions database vault were not really good, so the feature was not really important for many customers. But as this has changed, I'm on my way to promote this feature to make your that you can make your applications more secure. Okay, some more information on that. Documentation of the package, of course, in the Oracle documentation. There's a special chapter in the security guide. There's a support note on that. So this gives you some more information on the details. Okay. And that's it. Once again, thanks to Latvian Oracle User Group for inviting me. Are there any questions?